For 30 years, my light has guided ships to safety. Now, I watch it guide the dead as they drift aimlessly on the tides. The contradiction is simple, but it gnaws at the root of everything I know. Vessels that should have gone down in storms, that I logged as wrecked decades ago, return whole. Their paint is fresh, their hulls are intact, but no crew walks their decks. From the lantern room, the world below feels embalmed. The air carries salt and rust, but no birds, no engines, no voices. Just the low, endless groan of the sea, and the metallic tick of the lens as it rotates, throwing my beam across black water. When the light touches them, the ships answer with silence. A cruise liner, cabins glowing faintly as if powered by some hidden grid. A freighter, its deck cranes swaying with no wind. They do not signal, though by law they must. They do not alter course, though physics demands they should. And still, they come. Morning meant measurement. Always had, always would. The sea could lie, the sky could lie. But numbers never did, unless my hand slipped. At 600 I wound the brass chronometer, checked the barometer, and logged the tide levels in my ledger. The ritual was more than habit, it was defense. As long as I had procedure, the ocean could not swallow me whole. The lighthouse itself spoke in its own vocabulary of sounds. Pipes pinged as they cooled, the lantern gear clicked and sighed, and somewhere deep in the iron ribs, condensation dripped like a patient metronome. Each sound was familiar, cataloged in memory like tools on a shelf. Silence, in contrast, was an intruder. Breakfast was oats, boiled in brine, always too salty. I sat at the galley table, listening for the hum of the generator. That steady bass note, vibrating through the floorboards, reassured me more than the meal did. If the hum stopped, the light would go dark. If the light went dark, well, that wasn't an option. After breakfast, inspection. I walked the spiral stair with a cloth and a bottle of solvent, rubbing down brass fittings until they gleamed. Salt air corrodes everything. Neglect is death. My boots struck the steps in a cadence that echoed against the tower walls, a percussion line to accompany the soft drone of the sea outside. And all the while, my eyes betrayed me. They flicked to the horizon through every porthole, searching for silhouettes. For years I looked for storms, for fishing boats, for tankers on the shipping lanes. Now I looked for the ones that should not be there. At midday, I took readings from the radio direction finder. Not that it mattered. The airwaves had been empty for months. The static hissed, like a lung refusing to exhale. Sometimes I thought I heard a voice beneath the noise, a warble too faint to confirm. I would note it in the log, neat script in black ink, and then draw a line through it, ashamed of the indulgence. That logbook is everything. The record, each page a bulwark against memory, because memory lies, especially mine. There is a name I cannot write in the ledger, though it is always at the edge of my tongue. A name carried on the waves, in the shape of the surf against the rocks. It belongs to my brother, Thomas. We were both supposed to crew the light. It was meant to be a two-man rotation. Redundancy, time. Safety. But one winter, years ago, we had a disagreement over shore leave, he demanded. I refused. The boat that should have carried him to the mainland never came back. Whether it was storm or error, I will never know. I stayed here, faithful to the flame. He vanished beneath the same beam that should have kept him safe. That is my burden, my punishment, to hold the light for ships that never answer, to guide others while knowing I failed the only one who mattered. So the day continued, cleaning, checking, listening. The sounds told me I was still alive. The gull's absence told me something had shifted in the order of things, but I pretended not to notice. Dusk was the most important moment. The tower awoke. The generator's hum rose in pitch as the lantern engaged. Gears turned, prisms aligned, and the beam carved its eternal arc across the horizon. My job was to keep it pure, steady, unbroken. I stood at the gallery rail, the wind like cold knives against my face, watching that blade of light sweep across the water. Each pass felt like a heartbeat. Order, die, routine, a declaration against chaos. And on most nights, the sea answered in kind. Waves rolled, stars burned, and nothing approached. But some nights, the light found them. Ships that should not exist. They never moved until I touched them with the beam. Then, and only then, I could swear their decks stirred. I told myself it was shadows. Always shadows. But shadows don't look back. It began as a whisper in the static. The radio was part of my noon ritual, though I'd stopped expecting human voices long ago. I tuned across the maritime bands, logging silence. Always silence. But that day, a pattern cut through. 3 rising tones, like a sonar ping slowed to a funeral dirge. Then silence again. At first, I dismissed it as atmospheric bounce. Ionospheric distortion could play tricks on a lonely man's ears. I noted it, drew a line through it, and carried on. The next day, it came again. Same 3 tones, same unbearable pause afterward, as if something were waiting for me to respond. I sat with my hand hovering over the transmitter switch, thumb twitching. Protocol said I should acknowledge unidentified signals. But protocol was written for a world that still answered. I logged it. I told myself it was coincidence. 2 days in a row, nothing more. But the third night, the lighthouse itself betrayed me. I was at the lantern gallery, watching the beam carve its arc. The horizon was clean, no silhouettes, no phantom hulls. Then, the foghorn sensor tripped. The horn bellowed once, twice, vibrating through the bones of the tower. The device only triggered if another vessel's radar or transponder pinged us. But the sea was empty. I descended to the radio room, heart hammering. The equipment hissed with static. I tuned down band. The 3 tones answered me, this time louder, clearer. And underneath them, I thought I heard something else. A voice. No, not a voice. More like the breath of words, pressed flat against the static. I leaned closer, as if proximity could grant clarity. My hand shook against the dial. For a moment, I swore it spoke my name. Not keeper, not station. My name. The tower was utterly still. No gulls, no waves striking the rock. Just the slow pulse of the horn, and that impossible sound riding beneath the static. I should have written it off, struck it from the ledger like before. But the rule of 3s is merciless. Once is chance. Twice is pattern. The third time, it's truth. The signal existed. Something out there was reaching for me. And the longer I listened, the more certain I became that it wasn't coming from beyond the horizon. It was rising from beneath the sea. I began with the assumption that the anomaly could be explained. That was always the starting point. My whole life in the lighthouse had been governed by rules of optics, mechanics, weather, and tide. If a thing happened, there was a cause. If the cause was not visible, it was simply hidden. So I treated the signal as I would any equipment fault. First, I dismantled the receiver, piece by piece. Contacts cleaned, tubes checked, wiring inspected for salt corrosion, Everything was intact. When I reassembled it, the tones returned as if nothing had been touched. Next, I compared my notes to naval codes. 3 rising tones were used for buoy tests once, decades ago. But those signals were always followed by identifier bursts. Mine were followed by silence, heavy as a stone. The more I listened, the more the silence pressed against me. I began to keep the headphones draped around my neck during meals, the faint hiss whispering in my ear as I ate. I told myself I was waiting for variation. What I was really waiting for was proof that I hadn't gone mad. On the 4th night, the light struck metal. The beam swept across a cruise liner, one I recognized immediately, the Aurelia. She had gone down 20 years earlier in the North Atlantic. I remembered because I had filed her last distress call into the log. Collision with an iceberg. All souls lost. And yet here she was, pristine. Her decks lined with chairs, windows glowing as if passengers still moved behind them. I trained the telescope on her. At first I thought the movement I saw was just the swaying of lifeboats. But then, a figure. Just one. On the forward deck, pacing slowly from rail to rail. No light touched its face. I swung the beam back again, heart pounding. Empty. The deck was bare. The signal tone flared in my headphones. Louder, sharper, as though the Aurelia herself had answered. I stayed awake until dawn. The investigation became an obsession. I charted every instance of the tones, every ship the light revealed, cross-referencing them with maritime disaster reports in my archive. Patterns emerged. Freighters lost to fire. Tankers capsized in storms. A submarine reported sunk with all hands. All returning, whole and silent. It was impossible, of course. And yet, my ledger filled with coordinates, dates, and sketches. I began to map the impossible as if it could be made logical. The cracks in order widened with every entry. The first artifact came drifting in on the tide. At dawn, I found it wedged between the rocks. A lifeboat, its paint scraped, but its hull intact. The name stenciled on its stern stopped me cold. Thomas Bright, my brother's name. Not a ship I recognized. Not from any registry. Just a lifeboat with his name, as if the sea itself had chosen to mock me. Inside lay a single object, a journal, sealed in oilskin. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. The pages were warped from damp, the ink blurred but legible. The handwriting was not mine, but it was familiar. The first entry, December 17th. Land in sight. Not sure what shore this is, but the light is still burning. Keeper must be alive. I will wait for him to answer. The date was wrong. 2 years ahead of the current year. I flipped further. January 3rd. I hear the tones at night. They echo in the hull, in my teeth. Sometimes I see him standing at the rail. He does not look at me. The last page was blank. My name was etched into the paper by a hand that had pressed too hard, as though whoever wrote it had broken the pen. I could not breathe. My lungs seized as though the salt air had thickened into water. I shut the journal and locked it in the supply chest. Procedure demanded containment. Logic demanded I not touch it again. But at night I could hear the pages rustling, though the chest was sealed. Sleep abandoned me. My routine stretched thinner, fraying at the edges. I forgot meals, forgot to polish the fittings. The beam grew cloudy with salt. For the first time in 3 decades, I considered letting it die. The signal would not let me. One evening, just past midnight, the 3 tones changed. Instead of silence, they were followed by fragments of voice. Broken, distorted, but words. Keeper. Light. Watching. The sound design of the tower seemed to shift with it. Pipes no longer dripped at intervals. They sighed like lungs. The generator's hum wavered, faltered, then matched the rhythm of the tones. Even the seas, surf on the rocks, beat in time. As though the whole world had tuned itself to the signal. I should have smashed the receiver. I should have fled to the mainland. But logic kept me chained. Logic said, if there is pattern, there is cause. If there is cause, there is knowledge. And if there is knowledge, there is control. So I kept listening. The second artifact came not by tide, but by air. The beam illuminated a freighter, St. Catherine's, lost in the Gulf 25 years ago. As the light swept her stern, something fluttered free, caught in the wind, and landed on the gallery rail at my feet. A sheet of paper. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was a log extract, typewritten, position maintained. No sign of crew. Vessel continues to move without propulsion. Observers instructed not to engage. Phenomenon consistent with prior cases. Recommend expansion of exclusion zone. No date. No signature. Just a reference number stamped in black ink. There were others then. Others who had seen what I was seeing, and they had chosen not to warn us. The page stank of diesel and mold. I burned it in the stove, but the smell lingered. By the 7th night, my hands no longer trusted the pen. My log entries turned into jagged scrawls. My eyes hurt from staring too long through the telescope, but I could not stop. The ships gathered closer, drifting in slow circuits around the lighthouse. Their decks remained empty, yet when the light passed, shadows moved. I realized, with growing dread, that the signal was not a call. It was a response. The tones had begun only after the shipping lanes went silent. The ships returned only after the world stopped answering. They were not seeking guidance. They were acknowledging mine. Every sweep of the light was summoning them. And when I covered the lens with a blackout cloth, the tones grew frantic, surging in volume until the headphones vibrated on the desk, as though something in the dark sea howled in frustration. I tore the cloth away. The beam flared again. The tones subsided to their steady rhythm. Relief washed over me. Not because the danger had passed. No, because I understood, in that moment, the horror of my duty. The light was not saving anyone anymore. It was feeding them. It happened on the coldest night of that winter, when the sea turned black as obsidian and the wind stopped entirely. The lighthouse, usually alive with its orchestra of groans and sighs, fell still. Even the generator's hum seemed to recede into silence. The signal arrived without static. Pure, clean, 3 tones. And then a voice, whole at last. "Keeper, guide us." My blood turned to ice. It was not the voice of strangers, nor of officers lost at sea. It was Thomas, my brother, dead for decades, speaking with the calm authority of a man who had always known I would fail him. I gripped the desk until my knuckles cracked. "You're not real," I whispered. "You drowned," the voice answered, as if leaning close through the receiver. "I did not drown. I was carried. We all were. And now we wait." The beam swept across the horizon. Every ship I had logged, every ghost vessel, had gathered in a perfect circle around the lighthouse. Liners, tankers, trawlers, the submarine half buoyant with water sluicing from its hatches. Their decks swarmed with movement now, figures pacing, standing in rows, all turning as one when the light touched them. They were waiting for me. The tones swelled, filling the tower, rattling glass panes and vibrating the lantern gear. My ears rang. My teeth ached. "Keeper, choose. Darkness or the light." In that moment, I understood the truth I had refused to see. The ships were not lost, they were claimed. My light had not been a defense against chaos, but a beacon to it. Each rotation was an act of feeding, sustaining something that dwelled in the deep. The figures on the decks were not sailors returned, but hollow things animated by the signal. And Thomas, whatever wore his voice, was only its mouthpiece. I staggered to the lantern gallery. The blackout cloth lay folded by the rail, heavy with salt. One simple motion could end it: smother the beam, plunge the sea into darkness, break the chain of cause and effect. But the voice followed me, echoing not just in the radio, but in the walls, the glass, the very stone. "If you let it die, Keeper, they will come for you instead." Below, the water shifted. Dozens, hundreds of figures stood along the rails of their ships, gazing up at me, unmoving. If I extinguished the light, I would not survive the night. And yet, if I kept it burning, I would damn the world to their endless return. My hands trembled on the cloth. Duty and guilt warred within me. All my life I had clung to routine, to order, to the faith that light meant salvation. Now the truth mocked me. The light was the bait, and I had been the fisherman's hand. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time in 30 years, I let my routine collapse. I dropped the cloth. The beam continued its rotation, steady and merciless, cutting across the black water. I chose survival. And in that choice, I surrendered. The tones ceased. The circle of ships drifted closer, and the voice of my brother whispered, almost tender, "Good. Guide us, Keeper, forever." Dawn broke, though it changed nothing. The ships remained, circling slowly, their hulls gilded by the pale sunlight. From a distance, They looked alive. Paint unblemished, masts straight, decks orderly. Only the silence betrayed them. Silence, and the way their shadows moved against the light. I moved through the lighthouse like a man in a dream. I checked the chronometer, wound the gear, polished the brass, logged the tide. Not because the numbers mattered anymore, but because without them, I would shatter. My hands needed work. My mind needed walls. The generator hummed. The lantern turned. The beams swept across the horizon, binding me to the circle of dead ships. Each time it touched them, I thought I saw Thomas among the figures, his outline sharper, more defined. Watching, waiting. I no longer sleep. The rustle of the journal in its chest keeps me awake, though I never touch it. The tones have faded, replaced now by something worse. Silence that expects. The kind of silence that leans in close, hungry. I understand my duty now. It is not to protect the living. There are no living sailors left to protect. My duty is to keep the light burning, to honor the pact I never agreed to but cannot escape. If the beam falters, they will come ashore. If it dies, they will come for me. So I polish the lens, I oil the gears, I keep the generator fed. Not out of hope, but out of fear. Order has not triumphed over chaos. Order has been consumed, repurposed, worn like a mask. The world beyond my horizon is already theirs. I am not a savior. I am a custodian of their passage. From my lighthouse, I watch a world of ghosts. And the cruelest truth is this: they don't need a captain anymore. They have me.